Okay. Good evening. My name is Jane Bowman, and on behalf of the Miami Valley chapter of Ohioans to Stop Executions, I want to welcome everyone to this evening's presentation, Repealing the Death Penalty, A Journey of Hope. As the flaws and injustices in Ohio's death penalty system have become more apparent and executions have been halted, many citizens are questioning whether it is now time to put aside capital punishment and instead work to prevent crime and violence in a more humane and effective manner. Tonight, we are fortunate to have a trio of remarkable speakers address this critical issue. And we are honored to have as our moderator, Dr. Martha Henderson Hurley, professor and chair of the Department of Criminal Justice and Security Studies at the University of Dayton. Dr. Henderson Hurley received her undergraduate degree from Furman University and her master's and doctorate degrees from the University of Cincinnati. She is the author of numerous scholarly publications in the field, including her recent book, Aging in Prison, The Integration of Research and Practice. Dr. Henderson Hurley serves on the board of directors of the Greater Dayton Christian Connections and is a member of the Marianist Social Justice Collaborative's Death Penalty and Restorative Justice Issue Team. And we again thank her so much for being our moderator this evening. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Henderson Hurley.
Thank you very much. I would just ask if everyone could please mute if you're not speaking, and I would again welcome you all to for joining this session tonight. As many of you are aware, a bipartisan group of Ohio legislators introduced bills to repeal the death penalty in Ohio. Senate Bill 103, introduced by Huffman and Antonio, and House Bill 183 by Smith and Miller. It seems appropriate that we come together in this moment to hear the perspectives of those who have been directly impacted by the death penalty system, and to listen and learn about why they believe there is a better way to prevent crime and violence in our community. During tonight's session, we will have 3 rounds of questions that we are asking our panelists to respond to. We will ask those of you on the call to hold your questions until the end, when we will have our Q&A session. We begin tonight by asking each panelist to share with those in attendance the story of how they are directly connected to the death penalty. We are joined by Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker, who tragically lost her son to murder; Terri Steinberg, whose son was sentenced to death in Virginia despite his innocence; and Jennifer Pryor, who is the director of organizing at Ohioans to Stop Executions. Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker, could you please start us off tonight by sharing your story of how you are directly connected to the death penalty?
Thank you, Dr. Hurley. Years ago when I was in seminary, and it wasn't that many years, but it seems like years ago, we were doing a case study on the death penalty. I was in opposition to the death penalty. I did not see any purpose that it served, and I wrote a paper in opposition to the death penalty. My professor, a man of God, a preacher and professor, said that you only oppose the death penalty because you haven't had someone in your immediate family and it hasn't impacted you immediately. And I took that with a grain of salt, I guess. So on May 6th of 2013, I received a call late night. Well, actually, my husband was getting up to go to work, and he got up at around 2:30 to get ready for work. And by the time he left at 3:30, I got up and I noticed that my phone was just blinking, blinking, blinking. And I was just trying to figure out why everybody was calling me. And of course, when you get those early morning calls, you figure someone's passed on. And I thought maybe it was my dad who's elderly. But my dad was one of the people trying to call, as well as my youngest son. And I found out that my 28-year-old son had been murdered, and in Dayton. And I was in Indianapolis at the time. I lived there, and I called my husband, who immediately came home and took me there. So the professor's words rang true, and there was just a little short time later when there was a retaliation killing, supposedly around my son's murder. And at first, I'll admit to everybody, I was like, yay. And then I thought, I was like, who wants any other parent, any other sibling, any other grandparent, any other relative of someone that they loved to feel the way that I felt when I learned about my son's death, and still go through it. I didn't understand this whole vengeance thing, and I was just very upset with myself for feeling it even for a little bit. So a little bit later, a few years later, actually, I met Dr. Sullivan, who brought a panel of people to Dayton after the Oregon District shooting, and they were talking about losing their relatives to violence. And I talked about my son. I believe actually I was involved with Miami Valley Ohioans to Stop Executions before this incident. Pretty sure I was. Just because I've always felt that no one should feel the loss of a loved one to violence, and the death penalty is violence. That's it.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Walker. We'll ask Ms. Terri Steinberg, could you please share your story in connection with the death penalty?
Thank you, and thank you, Crystal, for sharing your story with us. So my story began, I've always been opposed to the death penalty. I was raised Catholic and went to Catholic school for 12 years. And, I learned my faith, and I learned that all life was sacred, a precious gift from God to be protected and respected. So the death penalty made no sense to me. But of course, as a busy mom, I had 4 small children, and I did nothing about it. I learned the 10 commandments. The 5th commandment said, thou shalt not kill, with no footnotes, no exceptions. So why would we be having this thing called the death penalty? But, like I said, I was a busy mom, so I didn't do anything about it until one day it came into my home and threatened the life of my oldest child and destroyed the happiness for the rest of us. But 2 days before my son turned 20, a young man named Owen shot and killed another young man named Danny. Now, Danny had been one of the biggest drug dealers in our area. At the time of his death, he was found with $500,000 worth of drugs and money in his possession. But anyway, and they found Owen. They knew that Owen had done it. Owen fled from the county almost immediately, and he was hidden out in California for about 2 weeks. And when they brought him back to Virginia, they threw him in a cell and threatened him with the death penalty and told him that, they were going to put his girlfriend in jail as well as an accessory. And so after 2 weeks of being threatened with the death penalty, he decided to tell them that my son asked him to kill Danny. Now, Justin I have 4 kids and he had 2 half siblings, and one of them was just 10 years old. And when Brittany heard what Owen had said, that Justin asked him to do it, in her sweet, innocent wisdom at 10, she said, well, why didn't Owen just say no? Even at 10, she knew better. My kids were 18, 15, and 4 at the time. Imagine being 18 years old and the brother that you love, who taught you how to play basketball, who played with you and took care of you, walked you to school, is now, in jail and, being accused of committing this horrible murder. you know, he was busy trying to make plans for his college and figure out what he was going to do with the rest of his life. And now he's got this, you know, fear of losing his brother weighing heavy on his shoulders. And his younger sister, or the older sister, she was 15. She was captain of the cheerleading squad, and she should have had this very happy, healthy high school experience. And instead, that was taken away from her as well. And then the 4-year-old, I mean, how do you explain the death penalty to a 4-year-old? This is the brother who used to, you know, let her sit on his lap and watch Disney movies with her and take her to McDonald's and get her a snack. We didn't tell her. We figured it wasn't going to take a rocket scientist to figure out what had happened, and we would be able to get him home before we had to destroy her innocence. But he went to trial, and I remember he turned himself in. I was so proud of him because I believed in the system. And when he called me up on May 1st of 2001, and he said, "Mom, I have to turn myself in. They think I had something to do with Danny's death." He said, "Now I've been selling marijuana and I might have to do some time, but it's just marijuana and it's my first offense. Please don't worry. I should be home in a few days. I just need to clear my name." And I remember I collapsed to the floor. I was in such shock and so scared. You know, I felt like I'd failed my children. I'm supposed to protect my children. And I don't know where I had messed up or missed out on figuring out what was going on with my oldest son, who had not been living with me at the time. But anyway, he turned himself in, and the next thing we knew, he was facing a death sentence. The trial started in January and lasted for about 3 weeks. And I remember before the trial started, my youngest, the 4-year-old, she says to Mom, because I was getting ready to take the Christmas tree down, I knew I'd be tied up in the trial the rest of the month. And, you know, as I'm starting to take the tree down, she looks at me, she says, "Don't take the tree down yet, Mom. Justin hasn't gotten his presents." We hadn't told her where he was or that he wasn't coming home. So I left the tree up. And anyway, we get to trial. And after 3 weeks of trial and testimony, witnesses had been manipulated and evidence had been withheld, and the jury came back with a verdict of guilty. We were shocked. And I remember thinking that the next day we were going to have to go back and listen to the sentencing, and the sentencing would tell us that, you know, whether or not my son was going to serve life in prison for a crime he didn't commit, or if he'd get a sentence of death. And I remember thinking and telling my oldest two, the only thing I could think of that would help them handle what they were about to hear. And I said that, you know, being raised Catholic, we believe that the death penalty is wrong. And there's many people who believe just like us. And I think that if he gets a death sentence, we'll get lots of support. People will come out and help us and save him, and we can fix this. But if he gets life in prison, I don't think many people are going to care that a 20-year-old young man is going to prison for the rest of his life for something he didn't do. And as the words were coming out of my mouth, I didn't quite believe them myself, but it was the best I could do at the time. And the next day we went into court, and after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict, with a sentence of 3 years for a gun he never touched, 30 years for his first offense of selling marijuana, and death for murder for hire, a crime he didn't commit. We were devastated. I mean, it's hard to describe what that does to a family, you know, but here I had never talked about the death penalty before, and now it had become my life because I had to save my son. I knew now I had to do something about it. So 2 days after he was sentenced to death, I had heard about a group protesting the death penalty on the front of the Supreme Court steps. And I drove into DC, which was not my strong suit. And not only did I find where they were, found a parking place. And I got out of the car and I ran up to this group of people holding a picture of my son, saying, "They want to kill my son. Does he look like a monster to you?" That's what they call him in court. You know, when there's a death penalty case, they talk about them as monsters, not as human beings, not as somebody's son, not as somebody's brother. So does he look like a monster to you? And that's where I met Bill Pelkey and Abe Bonowitz and many other people from the Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing. And I told them what had happened to my family, and Bill took me in as family. He, he helped me through so much. He called me a couple months later, and he asked if I would come to Ohio. It was 2003, and asked if I would come to Ohio and tell my story and share my story. And I had never done that before. But I knew that I had to walk through any door that opened in order to save my son. I said, and I remember I said, I'll have to call you back. And I went downstairs and I talked to my husband. And I said, they want me to go to Ohio, and I'm going to go spend a couple days with a bunch of strangers in places that I've never been and talk about what's happened to us. And I don't know if I should go. And he said, of course you should go. And we need to do whatever we can. So I did. I packed my bag, and I remember getting off the plane and not even knowing if I would remember what they looked like. I was in such shock when I met them. But there he was, standing there with a big sign with my name on it and wearing our Journey shirts, and took me in. And it was the best thing I ever did. I learned so much from these people. Today happens to be Bill's birthday, and we lost him last November to a heart attack. But we will continue to carry the torch in his honor. And though my heart is broken for having lost this friend, I know that my heart is forever blessed because I had him. So that is how I got involved. I did not intend to be, an advocate for abolition, an activist against the death penalty. It found me, and it gave purpose to my pain. And so, as hard as it is to relive the nightmares of what we went through, it's our hope that, we can open hearts and change minds about what happened to us, and that the death penalty system is broken, and we just cannot take that risk of executing an innocent person and having a death penalty. Really, capital punishment is the manifestation of the same violence it claims to deter. So when you take away all the legal rationale and the dignified court proceedings, what remains is still murder. And we detest that. We are supposed to be better than that. And so it is, hope that one day we can, and I know Ohio is so close. And so, if we can just kind of push it right over the line and stop it. We just did in Virginia. We just abolished the death penalty in Virginia. And I know we can do it here in Ohio too. I mean, with this opportunity to share my story, it is hard, but the journey has allowed me to show that, the bad that has happened to me and my family, we are so much more than those bad things. And, we can rise above that. Life is messy, it's hard, but you can't, and you can either choose to wallow in the messy and the hard, or you can choose to find the happiness and the blessings and the broken. And I know that this journey has been hard. 20 years I've been trying to save my son. I remember he said, I should be home in a few days. It was May 1st, 2001, and he's still not home. Now he's no longer facing death. Thank God. His sentence was actually vacated in 2013, but we're still fighting the court system to get him home. My son had 3 execution dates, and there were two dates where we came this close to opening those doors and bringing him home. And I mean, what a roller coaster ride no family should ever have to go through. And so it is my hope that, by telling a story, we can help people understand that we need to fight for no death penalty. And I also hope that any young people that hear his story can think about their choices, because their choices affect not only themselves, but their families. And Justin had no idea that his choice to sell marijuana was going to hurt his family so badly. And so, if there's any takeaway from what has happened to us, it's, make good choices every day.
Thank you, Terri, for sharing your story. I will ask Jennifer, who is the director at Ohioans to Stop the Executions, if you could please share with us tonight your journey in this work.
Thank you. Wow. So I'm sandwiched between two mothers with such an amazing experience with the death penalty. And my experience is honestly their experience in that I became an advocate after really understanding the policy of the death penalty. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I am a geriatric millennial, as they like to label us. And our generation is been labeled for being very self-serving and self-centered. And that's what I was for a long time. I was very focused on having fun and being ambitious about my career. And then I became 4 years ago, at 32 years old, I was pregnant. I became someone's mother of another boy, right? We're talking about our sons, ladies. And I became a mother of a boy. And I realized I have to fix the entire world right now. They say that we go through a nesting period. And I mean, my nesting period was on max. I wanted to change the whole world and fix it all. And I got involved in politics, thinking that's how you do that. And very quickly, I found out that really it came down to legislative policy. And that's where true change takes place. And at the end of 2020, I was wrapping up a political campaign, and I got to see like the end of the federal execution spree wind down. Began to do a little research specifically on what happened in 2020 and found that there were several people presumed innocent that were executed. 17 people were executed in 2020, and I was on fire because I couldn't imagine that being me and me leaving my child behind or my child being innocent. I just couldn't imagine innocent people being faced with such a terrible circumstance, as you know, Terri was just talking about. So I was ranting and raving every time someone who loved me got on the phone. I was like, and did you hear about this terrible execution or what have you? And I guess they got tired of hearing me talk. And so through some divine intervention, one of my good friends introduced me to ODSI, Ohioans to Stop Executions. And it was perfect timing because we had Governor DeWine in Ohio who had, almost immediately when he got here, he started issuing reprieves on death penalty dates. And it seems that he was going to allow space for the work to be done. And Ohioans to Stop Executions years ago, when he came in office, took advantage of it. They used that time very wisely and started to engage with our legislature and speaking with, you know, Republicans and Democrats alike and asking them what their thoughts were, only to find the big issue, the great divide had been no one was talking to them. Once we found out that everyone, that's probably an overstatement, but almost everyone saw that this was a failed policy, didn't see a purpose in it. They saw the waste of it. And we really did have support that we needed. We were really able to get the support nationally to start doing the work. And so when I came on board doing this work, the ground had really already been laid. And I came in with my passion and my fire, and I met people like Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker, and Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan, and so many people who had personal stories directly impacting their lives around the death penalty. And it just made it so easy to do my work. So my encounter with the death penalty isn't very personal, other than the fact that I've internalized all of the stories of the people that I work with. And I can't quit until we end it. And so thank goodness for the Ohioans to Stop Execution team and all of our partners, because we actually have a chance at ending it now. And I'm on fire to do it.
Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your story with us. For this next round, I would like to ask our panelists to respond to the following. Opponents of the death penalty often contend that the administration of capital punishment is arbitrary and racially discriminatory. could you please share with those in attendance your perspective on these issues? And each panelist will have about 5 minutes to respond. We will begin with Reverend Dr. Walker.
Thank you. I did unmute myself, right? Thanks. Is it racially motivated? In a good portion of cases, it absolutely is. Just doing the studies on the death penalty working in Ohio, we find that it depends on which county that you live in. So it's not the heinousness of the crime, it's your living situation. It's the color of your skin. It's if you live in Cuyahoga County compared to Wayne County. And it shouldn't be that way. I've listened to exonerees, Kwame, and others who talk about people that were, just as Terri talked about her son, people that were witnesses just because they were coerced, just because there was something that they could get out of the system. So I find when I talk to a lot of clergy, particularly African-American clergy, that they have no idea that the death penalty is so skewed. And I'm surprised because we know that the justice system is skewed. So if the justice system is skewed, why wouldn't the death penalty be as well? So it's part of that racial motivation to give the death penalty to those who are persons of color and or poverty stricken that we fight against, but it's really just fighting against the opportunity for anyone to be able to redeem themselves, to be able to turn another leaf. And even if they don't, I don't, and I don't believe anyone else has the right to take another life. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Reverend Dr. Walker. We'll ask Terri Steinberg, could you please weigh in on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, it was very shocking to me when I first walked through those doors to visit my son in the prison system. What took me back the most was how many young people were here. You didn't see older white criminals in the system. You saw young kids and Black men, and young men, I mean, white young kids and Black young kids and Black men. And, you know, it is arbitrary. I mean, my son was accused of killing someone who had been selling drugs in our community at a large quantity. But his dad was Secret Service. This would never have been a death penalty case if Danny's father was not in the Secret Service. And it shouldn't matter what your parents do for a living, whether or not they're going to seek a death sentence for somebody. I firmly believe that had my son been the one who lost his life in that drug deal, that there would never have been a death penalty case. Not long after my son's case was vacated and sent back to Virginia for retrial, there was a case, another case in Manassas, same county, that sentenced my son. And it was another drug situation, same ages as the kids that died in my son's case. And to this day, I don't know what the outcome of that case was because there was no death penalty sought. They didn't get the media attention that my son's case did. And that's because they were Black and Hispanic kids. And the person that prosecuted my son, he was in Manassas, the Manassas prosecutor, and he had already put, before my son was sent to death row, Paul Ebert had put 14 other men on death row. And they knew that if you wanted to secure a death sentence, that you send them to Prince William County because Paul Ebert would get a death sentence, and Virginia's quick to execute. So it would be fast and furious. So yes, it is very arbitrary. and very biased, especially towards people of color or people who don't have the money. If you don't have the capital, you're going to get capital punishment. So, you know, we had no idea that this could go the way it did, and certainly didn't have the money to make things go any better. So yeah, it's very, very racially biased. It's also very expensive. So if they were to not threaten my son with the death penalty, or not threaten Owen with the death penalty, Owen would never blame my son, and the county wouldn't have spent millions of dollars, millions upon millions of dollars trying to kill him. So that money could have been better spent trying to keep kids from getting in trouble, protecting society by teaching kids instead of, you know, arresting them and locking up the key.
Thank you for sharing that response. I'll ask Jennifer Pryor if you could please respond.
Yes, it is arbitrary. I mean, I could put a period there. But truthfully, the same biases that are present in the death penalty are actually in every system, every failed system that leads a person to the death penalty. We know that many of the people who end up on death row come from broken homes or addiction or some other system where we had systems in place, but they didn't actually collect that person and they were failed. And then it tends to be the same biases. So I would say, just given some statistics that I did jot down, 56% of the people on death row are people of color, while only making up 15% of Ohio's population. 34% of Ohio's jail population are people of color. 45% of our prison population in Ohio are people of color. And further, 8 of our 11 exonerees from death row are people of color. And I always like to highlight something Derek Jameson actually said for me. It just rings true. There are no wealthy people on death row, which is alarming, because if we're talking about blind justice and justice being fair, then you shouldn't be able to buy your way out of it. It shouldn't be something that if you've done a wrong thing and this is the consequence for your wrongdoing, it should be even. But we continue to find with all sentences, not just with the death penalty, that wealthy people can buy their ways. People of means, people of access can get out of those consequences. And the death penalty is the one is finite. So how are we calling it justice, and how are we considering ourselves an evolved society if we have such an arbitrary system? So yes, it's definitely arbitrary. It's definitely biased, and it's very racially motivated, but it's also geographically motivated. Every county in Ohio can't even afford the death penalty. It's only a handful that have people on death row, who put people on death row in our entire state. So all of those factors, Ohioans can just do without it. If smaller counties with prosecutors are closing cases without the death penalty at their availability, then we can do it in Cuyahoga, we can do it in Hamilton, we can do it all over.
Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your perspective. For our next round, I'd like to ask the panelists to respond to the following. Is the death penalty an effective tool for justice? If it isn't, from your perspective, what are the viable alternatives? And we will begin with Reverend Dr. Walker.
I do not believe that the death penalty, please restate the question, Dr. Hurley, I'm sorry.
So is the death penalty an effective tool for justice?
Thank you. So I do not believe that the death penalty is an effective tool for justice. First of all, Terry and I were talking a little bit today about, what really is justice. Actually, it wasn't Terry and I, it was Allison and I. We were talking a little bit about, and it wasn't even Allison and I. I'm sorry, I'm so confused. I've been talking about this all day. It was a dear friend, Dr. Candy Hardy, and I were talking a little bit today about what is justice. So what is justice to some people? Is justice an eye for an eye? Is justice a chance of redemption? Is justice just something where your vengeance is coming out? What is justice? And I think once we define what justice is, son's killer is not going to bring our son back. There's no justice served in that. My son is gone until there's a time when I can meet him again. Justice in keeping him, the murderer, in prison for life, that may not be justice either, because this young man, who is the same age or maybe just a little bit younger than my son was when he died, keeping him in prison to do life sentence for what? I don't know. I certainly wouldn't want this young man to get out and murder someone else. I'm not saying that. So if life imprisonment is that kind of justice that we seek to maybe stop that, but I think that with our system, we need to continue to look forward and look and see how people are being redeemed. And that can happen. That can happen to anyone who chooses it. Some people don't choose it. So some people may have to stay in the system. But until that happens, it's just hard to say what justice is. But I certainly can tell you that justice is not the death penalty. It is not ending someone's life forever, that they have no chance to redeem themselves. That's it.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Walker. I will ask Terri Steinberg, could you please weigh in on whether the death penalty is an effective tool for justice?
Well, the death penalty certainly caused a lot of damage in my family. As I said earlier, that Owen being threatened with the death penalty caused him to blame Justin. When Justin's case was vacated, they decided to retry him. There was a lot of prosecutorial misconduct going along with that. That's a whole long story. But the point is, he sat in solitary confinement for over 5,000 days. I mean, just think about that, 5,000 days solitary confinement. Some of that was on death row. And then once they transferred him for his fair retrial, it was 4 years later, he was starting to feel the effects of solitary confinement, and he was asking to be taken out of solitary confinement, and they offered him a deal. Now, at this point, they'd piled on 6 new charges, 3 of which had death penalty, had a chance of death penalty for him, and then the others had life in prison. And so he was now facing 3 possible death sentences if he was found guilty of any of those charges. And so in a desperate attempt to find some kind of closure, even after his case had been vacated and he had been proven innocent, the trial hadn't happened yet, and he still wasn't home, and he was just losing his mind on, over solitary confinement. And so he accepted a plea deal to escape the death penalty. And justice for the other family, I sit and think about every time something came up with the death penalty, there's all these appeals. And with every appeal, there's more media coverage. And with every media coverage where we get a happy word, that family gets, that hurts them again. So for 15 years, that family, the justice that they thought they were going to get, they'd been promised justice of a death sentence for my son, and they never got that. And to this day, 20 years later, they still haven't gotten what they were promised, which was a death sentence. And they thought that they had been told that they would feel better once my son was executed. The truth of the matter is they lost a child, and they have an empty chair at their kitchen table. And we lost a child as well. And we have an empty chair at our kitchen table. And I don't think the death penalty did anything to heal either family. As an alternative, I believe there's a lot of progress with these restorative justice models. We do need to figure out what happened. We want to, if these people are going to be sent to prison and spend all this time, I think what we need to do is try and help them heal and help them grow into better people, just in case, God willing, they do come out. Most of these crimes are committed under the influence of drugs or alcohol or anger, or and once you take away those factors that caused someone to cause harm, you have a totally different person. I have talked to many men prior to their execution, and I find it hard to believe that some of them are guilty of the crimes they commit, just because they're such a totally different person by the time I met them. People do grow and change, and we hope that if we were to make a mistake, we would be allowed to grow and change and not be thought of as just that one mistake that you've made. And so I do think there's other restorative ways to find justice. Society does need to be protective from people who commit horrible crimes, but we don't have to kill them to protect them. We have perfectly good jails and prisons that can keep society safe without becoming the same people that we lock up and being murderers ourselves. And that's exactly what the death penalty is. The death penalty makes us murderers. The blood is on our hands. It is our votes. It's our politicians that push these policies, and it's our job to change that. And so, you know, we got to keep at it.
Thank you, Terri, for sharing your perspective. I will ask Jennifer if you could please respond to, is the death penalty an effective tool for justice? And if it isn't, from your perspective, what are the viable alternatives?
No, the death penalty is not an effective tool. And so for so many reasons, it's just wasteful for one. And like you've heard from both sides of the experience, it just causes more damage. And even if someone is guilty of a murder, their family didn't have anything to do with it. So it's torture for people, for so many innocent people. So no, it's not effective. And we do have answers to how we can start to heal. But I want to also go back to the fact that the death penalty policy is wasteful. One case can cost tens of millions of dollars. One case. Ohio has a very large death row, and we have, and just in Hamilton County, you have 3 current capital cases that we're looking at. So it's millions and millions of dollars that could be going into some preventive actions and preventive measures and policies. And I'll just go over a few that we actually talked about pretty clearly just this week. We have the holistic approach where you just acknowledge that some people are going to commit violent crimes because they do not have what they need. How do we get these people what they need or get them close to what they need so that violence isn't their first reaction? And so just looking at the data, just saying people don't have what they need. How do we fix that? That's the first thing that we need to do before we even start talking about justice. Like, how do we stop the trauma at its root so that there isn't any trauma to solve and to heal from? And so if we eliminate the death penalty, we will have those resources to start working on some of these systems. We can also do some other preventative measures at hospitals where people are coming in for gunshot wounds. And instead of them leaving angry or their family members leaving vengeful, you can actually implement resources right there on the spot and say, hey, we know you're mad. We know what you want to do. Let's not do that. We can also have some community-based intuitions that stop it before it starts. But all of that is preventative. And I really think it's important to end the death penalty so that we can prevent trauma before it happens. I'm really, really big into stopping it before it starts. That's me personally. I'm not speaking on behalf of Ohioans to stop execution. However, when it comes to justice, you've heard from 2 people on either side of the experience. It's just a matter of, one, listening to the families, listening to what they want. and listening to them from a healthy place. And then what is going to be good for the community? How do we restore the community? We can't replace the person that's been taken from the community, but we can restore the community to some capacity. And there are many nations and a few experimental states in the United States that are implementing restorative justice practices where they hold people who have been convicted of a crime accountable for their actions, and they have to make penance essentially to the families and to the community that lost a person. And it's hard. I think it was, I don't want you to quote me, I believe it was in New York, it wasn't New York, it was New Jersey. But they've actually had people say, this is very difficult, like just give me the time. I do not want to do the work that it takes to restore the people that have lost what I did, that face the consequences of what I did. And I think if we implemented that universally in our nation, we would have less crime because it's so hard. It's so hard to replace those things that people have built. I mean, from burning a building down to taking a life, you cannot replace that overnight. And you did it that fast. And so I think if we just really have people face the consequences of their actions, and not just by putting them in prison and locking them away and throwing away the key, but just saying, hey, you are still valuable as a human being. And with your value, you're going to have to replace what you've taken, what you've lost as a society. And it's not going to be easy and it's not going to be fun. But we still value you as a human being. I think that looks more like justice than us treating people like less than dogs. If we treated horses and pigs and dogs the way that our justice system treats human beings, PETA would have a fit. And I would expect us to be at least that angry about how we're treating our fellow human beings. So.
Thank you, Jennifer. I would just like to have one final round, and I will ask Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker, as someone whose son was murdered and who is advocating for the repeal of the death penalty, what would you like people on this call to take away from this session?
Thank you, Dr. Hurley. I would like people to take away from this session that the death penalty does nothing. It is, don't kill on my behalf, don't kill on my son and daughter's behalf that are still living, or the daughter of my son who was murdered. It is absolutely not going to do anything to heal the hurt that is in my heart. It's not going to do anything to heal the hurt in anyone's heart. It is just going to continue to cause more hurt, more anguish, and more anger. And I want to give up the anger. I don't want to be angry to the young man that did this. I do want him to pay. I want him to pay for his crime, but paying for his crime with his life does absolutely nothing. What does that do? It is not going to bring my son back. It is going to cause despair and anguish for his friends and for his family. So I want people to take away from this session is that the death penalty does nothing but fuel the anger and fuel the grief that is already in the community. It's certainly not stopping any crimes from taking place, because our crimes are going up. We continue to have more murders and more violent crimes. So that's not a deterrent to crime, and it's not a healing agent. That's what I would ask.
Thank you for sharing your perspective on that. I will ask Terri Steinberg, as the mother of someone who is sentenced to death row, who is innocent. What would you like people to take away from the talk this evening?
The death penalty is cruel and unnecessary, and it only creates more victims. We cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. And responding to killing with more killing only creates more victims. As I said earlier, every time we got good news for Justin, my heart broke for the other family because I knew that was more pain for them. You know, but I also knew that had my son's, you know, execution taken place, he would be free. He would have gone home to our Father in heaven, but it would be his family, his brothers and sisters and I, that would have had to deal with the aftermath of such a horrible, horrible situation. So we don't need to kill people to prove the killing is wrong. You know, it just doesn't work. The system is broken, it's arbitrary, it's expensive. There's so many reasons why we shouldn't have a death penalty, but the most important reason should be a moral one, and that killing is wrong. And killing people who kill people doesn't bring anybody back, and it doesn't teach us that killing is wrong. I always believed when my kids were little and they'd hit each other, you know, smack each other as children do, smacking their hand and saying, "You can't hit," did not teach them anything. That was me hitting them and saying, "You can't hit." That doesn't teach them a thing. I would take their hands and touch gently and tell them, "You have to touch gently." And this is just the magnified, you cannot kill. You know, we can't stop killing by killing. And so I just hope that people will think about the death penalty and do their research. And you know, here you've got a mother who lost a son to violence, and another mother whose son was accused of violence. And both of us hurt. Both of us are broken from what happened to our families. And there's been no healing with a death penalty system. And as Jennifer said, if we can start at the ground up and teach children to respond to anger in a better way, invest that money that we're spending on the death penalty on a few cases. And how do you decide which cases deserve a death sentence? Every loved one is loved just as much as another. So just because you're in this county and this county does have death penalty, and your loved one was killed in a different county where it doesn't have a death penalty, does that say that their loved one was any less worthy of justice? It just doesn't work. We can do better, and we have to. And so we will continue this fight until it's over.
Thank you.
Death penalty.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I will also ask Jennifer, as the director of organizing at Ohioans to Stop Executions, what would you like people to take away from the session tonight?
Well, I didn't get to cover a lot about this because this was such a passionate conversation, but ultimately, Ohio's in a great place to actually end the death penalty. And there's something that everyone in Ohio can do to push that forward. We can really get this done. And so that all of these energies, all these efforts, Terri doesn't, as much as Terri loves Ohio, she doesn't have to spend her energy in Ohio. If we get this done, she can go work in another state. I just want us to actually recognize this opportunity in this moment. We have a governor that's with us. We have impacted families on both sides of the experience, be it that they have a child or a family member that's been accused of violence, as Terri said, or someone who they've lost to violence, as Reverend Crystal Walker said, that are saying they don't want the death penalty for their personal reasons, as well as they don't see they don't see a reason for it for Ohioans in general. And so who are we doing this for? And I don't think we're really doing it for anyone. And so I'd like to just take that be a takeaway. But if I'm not too presumptuous, if you do not mind, Dr. Hurley, I would love to just share a slide that has phone numbers for everyone to call, and they can really make an impact, because these are committee members in our legislature who are going to make the decision on whether or not these bills, HB 183 and SB 103, get passed. And if you guys could make that choice, it would make a difference for us. Do you mind if I do that real quick?
No, please feel free. And then afterwards, we will open it up for questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Here it is. So we've got Senator Rob McCauley and Senator Teresa Gavarone. Those are their phone numbers there. We've got Representatives DJ Swearingen, I cannot talk, Cindy Abrams and Sharon Ray, and those are their phone numbers, and those are their respective bills and bill numbers. And please jot those down. And before you go to bed tonight, please call them and leave them a voicemail. And that would be the biggest takeaway for me tonight. If you guys made a phone call to each of these folks and left them a voicemail and said, I just came from an event. This is what I learned. This is what's important to me. I'm an Ohioan. Please stop the death penalty. This is the bill number. That would be huge.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing that. We've come to that point in our program where we are opening it up for questions. And Terry, there was one that was submitted in the chat. Are the police aware, or has a murderer been identified in your son's case? Do they have any idea of who might have committed the crime?
Definitely. It was Owen that committed the crime, and they arrested Owen within 2 weeks, but Owen was threatened with the death penalty, and in order to save his own life, he said that Justin asked him to do it. 5 years later, he recanted and said he only said that to protect himself, and that Justin had absolutely nothing to do with this murder. So in 2005, he had admitted that he lied in court to save himself. And then when Justin's case was vacated, the prosecutor, his detective, and one of the other officers in that prosecutor's office, they went down and met with Owen again, carrying a hidden tape recorder in their pocket. And they threatened Owen again with the death penalty, saying that if he didn't change his story back to Justin being guilty of this, that they were going to re-sentence him and take away his plea deal of no death penalty, and threatened him again with the death penalty. And Owen still stood by his story that Justin had nothing to do with it. And the only thing, Owen told those prosecutors that the only thing they were going to be able to get Justin on was selling marijuana. And so what they did after that, they came back and added the new charges and turned it into a kingpin, tried to make Justin look like a kingpin, which carried a death sentence for selling marijuana where a person was murdered, which added 3 more death eligible charges to his charges. So he was then facing 9 charges. And really, if you take a jury of 12 who don't have a lot of education on the law, it's just regular citizens who, I know I was naive about the law, but when they're looking at someone facing 9 charges, I think they already think he's got to be guilty of something. So the piled on charges made the case even worse and made it even harder for us to get justice for Justin. But Owen's in prison, and believe it or not, Owen will be released before my son will, even though he pulled the trigger and shot Danny 10 times at close range. It was his gun. There was never any doubt he did it. He's admitted it, but it was important for them to get this to be a capital case because Danny's dad was Secret Service, and he wanted the ultimate punishment for someone killing his son.
Thank you. Other questions? Now is the time to ask. We are a small group, so you can unmute yourself. I think you have that power to unmute and ask a question.
I have a question for Terri. Terri, what were some of the key ways that the Virginia abolition victory came about?
Well, I got involved as soon as my son got arrested because I needed to figure out how to save my son. So I've been doing this for 20 years, and we were doing a lot of talks in the community. We would go to churches and, tell our stories and, open minds and change hearts that way. But one of the things that I found to be very effective was there was a lobbyist who had gotten to know this representative very well, and he was very much for the death penalty. And she had been working on him, and she had me go out to coffee with him. So we met one morning for breakfast, and I told him my story. And of course, he said that should never have happened, and what can I do to help? And he says, I still think we need a death penalty, but that shouldn't have happened to your son. So every time he went in for a vote, I would just kind of send him a text message or send him a quick email. And so the night before the last vote, where he had still been voting for the death penalty, I sent a note and wished him well and said, and I know these are hard decisions for you, but, get some rest. And I hope, that you do what you feel is right tomorrow. And the next day he voted for abolition. And so I think sometimes these one-on-ones, when you ask this person to take a walk in your shoes and you really get to know them in that hour that you spend sitting face to face, and he can have no distractions because you're not in a big room, it's one-on-one. And that's when I think they really feel what we feel and understand that the death penalty is broken. One of the things I learned about these bills too is that oftentimes these representatives who are signing these bills, they don't even know what all of them say. I remember meeting with another representative, and when we pointed out, one of the phrases, I can't remember what the phrase was, it was years ago. He's like, that's not in there. I said, yeah, it is. It's right here. And we pulled out the page and pointed to it, and he changed his mind too. So that helped a lot. It was a lot of, strategic meetings and planning. And I had always hoped that we would get there. And I'm so glad that we did it. It's too late for my family, but God willing, it'll never happen to another.
Thank you for sharing that. I have a question for our panelists. Any one of you can respond to this. In my conversations with someone who is incarcerated on death row in North Carolina, one of the questions that he asked is, how is it that in Ohio, we reached a point where there is bipartisan support for the repeal of the death penalty? Could somebody speak to that?
Can I please? I actually was going to say it earlier, but I wanted to be considerate of time. Hannah Cummins, my executive director at Ohioans to Stop Executions, really took advantage of the reprieve that Governor DeWine had put in place right after he got into office. Previously, we had been working on clemency campaigns. We were trying to save lives directly, one-on-one. And when the reprieve started to happen, it was almost like, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Talladega Nights, but what do I do with my hands, Ricky Bobby? It was like, what do we do? We have this opportunity where we can focus on so many other things. And we did. So by we, I mean, mostly Hannah. We did partner with some lobbyists and started to work with legislators and meet with them. We met with over 100 lawmakers in a short period of time, only to discover that not only was this an assumed liberal issue, but it was also an undiscovered conservative issue. And it was a bipartisan issue because Ohioans saw how arbitrary and how useless and wasteful it was. And so I say she, but I see in the partnership kind of fused that and said, okay, you don't have to agree on everything, but on this you do agree. How can we move this forward? And we had the opportunity where Gene Schmidt, who previously was totally for the death penalty came back for about a handful of bills she wants to get passed. One of them was ending the death penalty. She was just for it, a few decades ago. And we had Nikki Antonio in the Senate, who has been presenting death penalty repeal for years without getting it ahead. And now Nikki Antonio has forward momentum that she needs. So really, it was a combined effort. It was magical. It was a lot of work. It was great timing. And that's how we got here. But it's honestly the exciting part about what we do is how it all came together.
Thank you. Other questions for our panelists?
I don't have any more questions, but I just want to say how inspired and touched I was by the messages that we heard tonight, and especially for those who are directly impacted. I know it's not easy to share your story, and I'm just extremely grateful on behalf of MV that you are able and willing to do that, because it gives us strength to keep fighting. And so thank you so much.
I want to say thank you to those of you who stepped into this because it was the right thing to do. Crystal and I got involved because it hit our families and we had to, but you guys are doing it because it's the right thing to do. And that gives us the strength to keep telling our stories and keep working with you and knowing that we're not alone and that you guys are working just as hard as we are to get this done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any lingering questions? We might have time for one more before I turn it over to Jane Bowman. I'm scanning the chat here to see if there's anything there. I don't see anything there. So I would just say thank you all for joining us this evening. And with that, I'm handing it over to Jane Bowman.
And I want to thank you, Dr. Hurley. You did a great job as always. And we are just thrilled that you are a part of this effort and that your academic background is combined with your moral passion. And that means a lot to us. So thank you. Thank you so much. If people want to get involved with our local chapter, I'd ask that you contact Jennifer at OTC and she will pass your name along to our local chapter. We meet regularly and we are grassroots as they get, and we are working in our community to share our message that there are better things and better ways to deal with the suffering in our communities than the violence of the death penalty. And we're not going to give up. We're going to work till it's over. And thank you all for listening to this message tonight. And I do think together we will end the death penalty.